Few mysteries in American pop culture have stirred as much debate, speculation, and heartbreak as the untimely death of Ricky Nelson. He wasn't just another teen idol, he was the first true crossover star. A child raised under the blinding lights of television who transformed into a rock pioneer and later a respected artist who defied the odds. For decades, fans clung to conflicting stories. Was his tragic end simply a mechanical failure, or was there something darker at play? Rumors of drug use, sabotage, and cover-ups swirled in the media, overshadowing the reality of his final moments. But what the evidence finally revealed was far more disturbing, not scandalous, but negligent. Ricky's story, from child star to cultural icon, doesn't just end in tragedy, it exposes a hidden failure that could have been prevented. And as you'll soon see, the truth behind Ricky Nelson's final flight leaves more sorrow than closure. Ricky Nelson's entry into the world was no ordinary beginning. Born Eric Hilliard Nelson on May 8, 1940 in Teaneck, New Jersey, he arrived in a family already steeped in entertainment. His parents, Ozzie and Harriet Nelson, were household names, a polished couple who represented the American dream during a time of rapid cultural change. Their radio show, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, wasn't just popular, it was groundbreaking. When television replaced radio as the centerpiece of American households, the Nelsons brought their brand of family storytelling to the small screen. That transition made Ricky's childhood unlike any other. His growing up years were broadcast live to the nation. On the show, Ricky and his brother David didn't play fictional characters, they played themselves. The Nelsons blurred the line between performance and reality, and this experiment fascinated audiences. Viewers felt like they were watching a real family, not actors reading lines. Ricky's awkward teen years, his changing voice, and even his natural charm unfolded in front of millions of strangers who tuned in weekly. It was a kind of intimacy America had never seen before. And Ricky, with his quiet charisma and boy-next-door looks, quickly became the standout of the family. But fame at such a young age came with its own pressures. Ricky's persona was shaped as much by the expectations of America as by his own family. He was the clean-cut son of beloved entertainers, and people expected him to embody that image. Yet beneath the polished exterior, Ricky wrestled with the same identity struggles that any teenager faces. Who am I really? What do I want to become? These questions weighed heavily on a boy who was already a national figure before he could even drive a car. It was music that gave Ricky his answer. In the mid-1950s, rock and roll was exploding across the country, sparking excitement among teenagers and outrage among parents. Ricky, still in high school, was captivated. Rock wasn't just a sound to him. It was freedom, rebellion, and a chance to carve out an identity separate from his parents' shadow. Against the odds, and to the surprise of his family and fans, Ricky decided to pursue music. It wasn't long before the boy from the sitcom made a leap that would turn him into something more, a rock star in his own right. Ricky Nelson's leap into music wasn't a quiet experiment, it was a cultural shockwave. In 1957, at just 17 years old, he released his first single, a cover of Fats Domino's I'm Walkin'. What started as a way to impress a date by showing he could sing turned into an instant hit. The record shot up the charts, selling over 1 million copies and launching Ricky into the ranks of America's most popular young performers. Virtually overnight, the sitcom teenager had transformed into a rock and roll sensation with an appeal that went beyond his TV audience. Unlike other actors turned singers, Ricky had credibility. His voice carried a smooth, melodic quality that felt natural and authentic, and his clean-cut image reassured parents while still thrilling teenagers. This balance made him a rare figure in the new world of rock music, someone who could bridge the generational divide. Songs like Poor Little Fool, which became the very first #1 hit on Billboard's newly launched Hot 100 chart in 1958, cemented his place in history. He wasn't just riding the wave of rock and roll, he was shaping it. Through the late 1950s and early 1960s, Ricky rolled out a string of hits that made him a household name far beyond television. Tracks like Hello Mary Lou, Travelin' Man, and Lonesome Town weren't just successful, they became anthems of a generation. His appearances on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet doubled as national showcases for his music, introducing rock and roll to millions of American families who might never have tuned in otherwise. In a sense, Ricky Nelson brought rock into the living room, turning what was once considered rebellious into part of mainstream culture. By the time he turned 21, Ricky had already sold millions of records and established himself as one of the best-selling male solo artists of his era. His boyish charm and undeniable talent set him apart from other teen idols, many of whom faded quickly after their initial burst of fame. But for Ricky, the music wasn't just a passing trend, it was his identity. Yet even as he basked in the glow of success, darker clouds were forming on the horizon. Music tastes were shifting, and the rise of new, bolder acts meant Ricky's reign at the top would soon face its greatest test. By the mid-1960s, the music landscape had shifted dramatically. The British invasion, led by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, redefined what youth culture wanted to hear. Suddenly, Ricky Nelson, once the golden boy of American rock, seemed out of step with the times. His clean-cut image and smooth ballads struggled to compete with the raw energy and experimental sounds that now dominated the airwaves. For the first time in his career, Ricky's chart dominance began to slip, and critics were quick to dismiss him as another teen idol who had peaked too early. But Ricky refused to fade quietly into nostalgia. Unlike many of his contemporaries who clung desperately to their early hits, he took a risk. He began experimenting with a new style, one that blended rock with the storytelling and soul of country music. This evolution gave birth to the Stone Canyon Band, a group that would go on to be recognized as pioneers of the country rock genre. Long before bands like the Eagles popularized the sound, Ricky was laying the groundwork, fusing his rock background with a new authenticity that resonated with a more mature audience. The gamble paid off. In 1972, Ricky released Garden Party, a song born out of personal humiliation. After being booed at Madison Square Garden for playing new material instead of his old hits, Ricky channeled his frustration into lyrics that declared, "You can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself." The song struck a chord with millions who saw it not just as a catchy tune, but as an anthem of individuality and resilience. It became one of the biggest hits of his later career, proving that Ricky was far more than a relic of the 1950s. Garden Party marked more than just a comeback. It symbolized Ricky's artistic independence. He had survived the harsh shifts of the music industry by reinventing himself, showing that he was willing to evolve rather than cling to past glories. For fans, it was a reminder of why they had loved him in the first place, not because he followed the crowd, but because he had the courage to stand apart. Still, behind the scenes, Ricky's personal life was becoming increasingly complicated, and the pressures of fame would soon test him in ways that music alone couldn't fix. Ricky Nelson's career wasn't confined to music alone. From the very beginning, his life unfolded under the glow of television cameras, but as he matured, Hollywood quickly took notice of his natural charisma. In 1959, he landed a role that would prove pivotal, playing a young gunslinger in Howard Hawks' Western classic Rio Bravo. Acting alongside legends like John Wayne and Dean Martin, Ricky brought a fresh energy to the film. Critics praised his performance, and audiences saw that Ricky wasn't just a singer or a sitcom star. He could hold his own on the big screen alongside Hollywood's biggest names. The success of Rio Bravo opened doors to other opportunities. In 1960, Ricky co-starred with Jack Lemmon in The Wackiest Ship in the Army, a comedic war film that showcased his versatility. His easy screen presence made him a reliable choice for studios eager to capture both teenage and adult audiences. Though he didn't pursue acting as aggressively as some of his peers, Ricky proved that he had the chops to succeed outside of music. His film career became another dimension of his multifaceted identity, one that solidified his status as more than just a passing teen idol. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Ricky continued to appear in television and film projects, often surprising audiences with the variety of roles he was willing to take on. He made guest appearances on popular series like The Love Boat, The Streets of San Francisco, and The Hardy Boys/Nancy Drew Mysteries. These performances reminded the public that even when his musical output slowed, Ricky's talent as an entertainer remained undeniable. He wasn't content to coast on old fame, he kept stepping into new arenas where his charm and versatility could shine. What made Ricky unique was his ability to adapt without losing his authenticity. In an industry where many stars became typecast or faded, he found ways to reinvent himself, first as a singer, then as a film actor, and later as a guest star who could still draw attention. Hollywood might not have defined Ricky Nelson's career the way music did, but it enriched his legacy. He was proof that his talent wasn't bound to a single medium. Yet while his professional life showed resilience and adaptability, his personal life was moving toward turbulence that no screen role could prepare him for. In April 1963, Ricky Nelson married Kristen Harmon, the daughter of football star Tom Harmon and actress Elise Knox. On paper, it was the ultimate Hollywood union, two children of famous families coming together in what seemed like a fairy tale wedding. Their romance was splashed across magazines, their photographs appearing alongside headlines that painted them as the perfect couple. To the outside world, Ricky and Kristen embodied glamour, youth, and success, a continuation of the American dream his parents had symbolized a decade earlier. Together, the couple had 4 children, each carrying forward the Nelson legacy in some form. Their firstborn, Tracy, pursued acting, building a career in television and film. Twin sons Gunnar and Matthew inherited their father's musical gifts, eventually forming the rock band Nelson in the 1990s, making history as the first family to achieve 3 generations of chart-topping artists. Their youngest, Sam, though less in the spotlight, also gravitated toward the arts. For a time, it appeared Ricky had it all: a thriving career, a beautiful wife, and a family that seemed destined to carry on the Nelson name. But behind closed doors, the story was far less picture-perfect. As Ricky spent long stretches on the road, Kristen struggled with the demands of raising 4 children largely on her own. Rumors of infidelity and emotional distance began to swirl, and the glamorous marriage slowly unraveled under the weight of resentment and unmet expectations. Friends recalled that Ricky, while devoted to his children, often felt torn between his desire to maintain his music career and the growing fractures at home. The pressures of fame, coupled with the strain of touring, widened the gap between him and Kristen. By the late 1970s, the marriage had deteriorated beyond repair. Arguments turned into long silences, and their once celebrated union became marred by conflict. In 1982, after nearly 2 decades together, Ricky and Kristen finalized their divorce in what became a painful and public battle. Custody disputes and financial disagreements spilled into courtrooms, leaving emotional scars on both parents and children. For Ricky, the breakdown of his marriage was more than just a personal failure. It was a wound that seeped into his music, adding layers of melancholy and reflection to his later work. His family remained central to his heart, but the dream of a perfect Hollywood love story had collapsed, leaving only fragments in its place. On December 31, 1985, Ricky Nelson boarded a chartered Douglas DC-3 plane with his band and his fiancée, Helen Blair. They were headed to Dallas, Texas, where Ricky was scheduled to perform a New Year's Eve concert. For fans, it was meant to be a night of celebration, a chance to welcome a new year with the music of a man who had already lived several lives in the public eye. But instead of another performance, the flight turned into a tragedy that would haunt the entertainment world for decades. Somewhere over DeKalb, Texas, disaster struck. The plane, an aging World War II-era aircraft, caught fire midair. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing smoke pouring from the fuselage as the pilots attempted an emergency landing in a field. When the wreckage finally came to rest, flames engulfed the cabin. Miraculously, the 2 pilots managed to escape through cockpit windows, but Ricky, Helen, and 5 of his band members were trapped inside. None of them survived. The nation woke up on New Year's Day to headlines that seemed impossible. Ricky Nelson, the boy America had watched grow up on television, the teen idol who helped shape rock and roll, was gone at just 45 years old. In the immediate aftermath, confusion and speculation swirled. Early reports suggested the fire originated from the cabin heater, a piece of equipment that had been known to malfunction. But tabloids quickly pushed darker narratives. Whispers began that Ricky had been freebasing cocaine on board, and that the fire was sparked by drug use. Though these claims were never substantiated, the rumors spread like wildfire, tarnishing his image and adding scandal to a tragedy that was already unbearable for his grieving family. Fans who had adored his clean-cut image struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the sensational headlines that now dominated the news. The official investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board eventually concluded that the fire had indeed started in the cabin, likely connected to the faulty heater. But the cause of ignition remained undetermined, leaving enough ambiguity for conspiracy theories to thrive. For years, fans debated whether negligence, bad luck, or something more sinister had brought Ricky's life to such a violent end. The mystery of that night became part of his legacy, a tragic final chapter that left more questions than answers and an ache that lingered far beyond the wreckage in Texas. For years after the crash, the truth about Ricky Nelson's final moments was buried under layers of rumor and sensationalism. Tabloids clung to the most scandalous version of events, claiming that Ricky and his band had been using drugs on the plane, and that the fire was sparked by freebasing gone wrong. It was a narrative designed to sell headlines, but it painted Ricky as careless and reckless, undermining his legacy as a beloved entertainer. Fans were divided. Some refused to believe the rumors, while others reluctantly accepted them as fact. The tragedy of his death was overshadowed by a story that was never proven. The reality, as later evidence revealed, was far more disturbing. Not scandalous, but systemic. Aviation historians, mechanics, and even surviving witnesses pointed to the same conclusion. The plane itself was a disaster waiting to happen. The Douglas DC-3 Ricky, boarded that night, had a history of mechanical problems, particularly with its heater system. Reports showed that the heater had malfunctioned on previous flights, and instead of being properly repaired, it was patched up with jury-rigged fixes that didn't meet safety standards. In essence, Ricky and his band had stepped onto a flying time bomb. When the heater finally failed during that fateful flight, it sparked a blaze beneath the cabin floorboards, where flammable materials made the fire spread uncontrollably. With no fire extinguisher and no proper fire retardant insulation on board, the passengers had little chance of survival. Toxic smoke and flames filled the cabin in minutes. Forensic reports later suggested that Ricky and the others likely succumbed to smoke inhalation before the plane even crashed. Meanwhile, the pilots, seated in a separate cockpit with a means of escape, managed to survive a cruel twist that added to the heartbreak. The most chilling revelation wasn't just that the accident was preventable, but that the people responsible for maintaining the aircraft knew it was unsafe and allowed it to keep flying. Negligence, not drugs, took Ricky Nelson's life. Yet because of the initial rumors, his reputation was scarred for years before the truth came to light. What was framed as a scandal turned out to be something far worse, a cautionary tale about oversight, responsibility, and the devastating cost of ignoring safety warnings. Ricky's death wasn't the result of personal failure, it was the result of a system that failed him. Ricky Nelson's story is more than a tale of fame and tragedy. It's a mirror of American culture across 3 decades. He was the boy who grew up in front of millions, the teen idol who helped bring rock and roll into mainstream living rooms, and the artist who refused to be trapped by nostalgia. Even as the music industry shifted, Ricky found ways to reinvent himself, creating sounds that influenced generations to come. His path was never simple, but it was always authentic, and that authenticity is why his music still resonates today. His legacy also lives on through his children, who carried the Nelson name into new eras of entertainment. Tracy Nelson became a successful actress, carving her own place in Hollywood. Gunnar and Matthew found chart-topping success with their band Nelson in the 1990s, making history as part of the only family to produce 3 generations of hitmakers. Name reinvented himself time and again, only to be taken by something so tragically preventable. In the end, Ricky Nelson remains an icon whose story blends triumph and heartbreak in equal measure. His songs, from Hello Mary Lou to Garden Party, remind us of his talent, while his fate reminds us of his fragility. The boy who once sang about being a poor little fool grew into a man who never stopped searching for authenticity in a world that constantly tried to define him. And though the mystery of his death has finally been solved, the truth leaves behind a haunting reality. Sometimes closure doesn't heal, it only deepens the tragedy.